Hear the word of the Lord from Genesis 33, verses 1 through 20. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I meet?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and the herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly, at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Well, let me leave you with some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of that place is called Succoth. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Paddan Aram. And he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohi Israel. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Heavenly Father, we come once again to you in prayer, seeking your help, seeking your Spirit's presence among us today as we open up to the book of Genesis once again. We ask, God, that you'd help us to hear the word that you intend for us to hear, that we would graft it into our hearts by faith, and that our hearing would become faith, our faith would become doing, that we would glorify you in all that we say and do, that we live for the glorious praise of your grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, well, we have concluded, I think everybody, hopefully, maybe not, but we've essentially concluded the holiday season. I hope it was a good one, refreshing one, good time with family for you and yours. And oftentimes what the holiday season features is extended time with extended family. For many of us, this is a sweet time. It's great to be in the company of family, fellowshipping, feasting, enjoying games and recreating and leisure, all of that stuff. It's a great time. For others, maybe it's, maybe a little bit different story. Might be in the idea of getting together for a little bit of a family reunion, family get-together. There may be a bit of trepidation. It may be more like a powder keg of sorts. You've got clashing personalities, clashing viewpoints. Maybe there's some lingering past drama that's left unresolved, these offenses from the past that have not been dealt with entirely, and so you never know what might happen. It's not a guaranteed explosion, but there certainly is a potential for it. You never know. You never know what Uncle Larry's going to say, okay? Now, this is essentially the vibe of Genesis 33 as we step back into the story of Jacob and Esau. What we have here is a reunion of brothers, a family reunion after 20 years of being apart, and there is a bit of tension here. Last time Jacob and Esau were together, Esau was planning to kill Jacob. And today, they come back together. And moving into this, as we read through, if we were reading straight through from Genesis 32 into Genesis 33, you would see this tension that's building up on Jacob's end. He's very fearful of this whole encounter. So this is the tension. This is where we start at here in Genesis 33. But because we are jumping back into the book of Genesis, which we started a year ago this time. A year ago was when we started our journey through Genesis. I realize we've taken a month break for Advent. It's kind of stepped out of this sermon series for a time to focus on the advent of Christ. And so to resituate us, we are going to do a little bit of recapping. Today's actually a lot of recapping. We're going to look at the big story of Genesis, what's been going on since Genesis 1 all the way up to this point, but then specifically focus in on Jacob's story. I do this because, one, we have new folks here, but also I know that oftentimes we're forgetful and we kind of lose our place. And so trying to refresh us so that we can grasp the significance of this text and what is going on in sort of a comprehensive viewpoint. So let's start off with the big picture of Genesis. Genesis is the foundational book of the Bible. The rest of the Bible will not make sense without making your way through Genesis. And in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, it's the story of creation. God created the world. By faith, we believe that God created the world. This is what the writer of Hebrews tells us. God creates the world, God fills it, God orders it, and he says it is very good. It's got this place of shalom, this place of peace. And the pinnacle of his creation is making image bearers, human beings made in God's image that he tasked with filling the earth and subduing it, exercising dominion. They are to be vice regents in the earth, ruling on God's behalf to see to the glorious elevation of creation. God created creation good and glorious, but to take that raw glory, to harness it, to change it, to manipulate it, to innovation and development, and make something all the more glorious out of creation, which man has been doing for quite some time. Now, this task that God has given Adam and Eve to fill the earth, to subdue it, to be fruitful, and to multiply gets severely complicated by Genesis chapter 3. In this story, serpent enters into this perfect place of Eden. And serpent, of course, is Satan in disguise. And he tempts Eve, who is deceived by the serpent. And she takes fruit and eats it and gives it to her husband. And Adam, he follows in her footsteps and steps into sin. And all of a sudden we see creation is broken. The shalom that God created for the world is fractured. We see the relationship between God and man is fractured. The relationship between Adam and Eve is totally jacked up. The difficulty of filling the earth and subduing it, we see this, and it's all sort of captured in the curse that God pronounces upon the serpent, the woman, and the man towards the end of Genesis chapter 3. God says to the serpent, "Cursed are you," and he says that you're going to slither around and you're going to be against the woman. He tells the woman her job of filling the earth, multiplying, this job of having children, of childbearing, is going to be painful work now. Adam is told that the work of filling and subduing, of dominion work, it's now going to become toil. By the sweat of the brow are you going to eat. And so we see what God created in the beginning, and it was good, and this work was good, and it was meant to lead to an even more glorious environment. Here it is destroyed, it's fractured, it's broken. And while God pronounces a curse and judgment upon the parties of Genesis 3 fiasco, nestled within that, there is a promise of redemption, the proto-evangelium. The first glimpse at the good news that God would bring redemption to this broken world. He tells them that the seed of the woman, from the seed of the woman, someone of her offspring is going to come along, and the serpent is going to bite his heel, but he will crush the serpent. Now, this is the promise that God makes. And so what happens from that point forward is essentially Genesis is a story about a promise-keeping God who makes promise and keeps promise to this uniquely charged family who's also very flawed. We don't need to deceive ourselves about any of their imperfections. They are far from perfect from this thing. And so we see Genesis, one way to look at this is essentially a family history. It's a family story. We follow the lineage from Adam to Seth, to Noah to Shem, to the man named Abraham, which we meet in Genesis chapter 12. God calls Abraham out of a life of paganism. He was a moon worshiper. And God says, I'm calling you Abram. He's Abram and then changes his name later. I'm calling you. I'm going to make you great. I'm going to give you an offspring. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to bless you so that you would bless the rest of the world. And so Abraham steps out in faith. He follows God. He forsakes his pagan gods, and he follows God. And God says, it says here that Abraham believed, and he was counted righteous. So Abraham starts to be, well, he's known as the father of the faith. He's the one who steps out following God in faith wherever God leads. And we follow Abraham's story, and he kind of bounces all over the place. He's got challenges and difficulties. There's opponents that come against him, and eventually he has a son named Isaac. Isaac, similar thing. Isaac receives this covenant promise. It's inherited. It's passed on from Abraham to Isaac. Isaac has a similar story where he kind of follows in Abraham's footsteps, and he walks faithfully with God for the most part. And then we see this passed on to the next generation, passed on to Jacob, which actually brings us finally to Genesis 33. So we see this covenant God makes to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. And here we land in Genesis 33, kind of right smack dab in the middle of Jacob's story. So we need to kind of catch a glimpse of what's going on with Jacob. Now, it's interesting here, the fact the covenant went from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, that itself is interesting, because if you were to go by birth order, which typically that's how inheritance would be passed down to the firstborn, and his firstborn would get the inheritance after that. Well, Jacob isn't actually the firstborn, he's the secondborn, which in this society is very interesting, that he becomes the heir of the promise, of the blessing. The one who it should be Abraham, Isaac, and Esau if you go by natural birth order, but God had a different plan. God chose Isaac to be the one who would inherit the promise. And you can imagine here, this is where the source of tension comes from Esau and Isaac. Esau is passed over. Jacob is the supplanter. He takes the place of Esau as the inheritor. And God is actually the one who inherited it. So you are intended for that. Now, you see the source of tension between these two brothers. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that they were twins. And Esau just barely came out. In fact, Esau came out first, and he was all red and hairy. And then Jacob came out holding on to his heel. And so he technically came out second. And these brothers, they didn't just have a falling out sometime in their life. They were always living in this tension with one another. In fact, while Rebekah was pregnant, she was having a lot of strange stuff going on inside of her as she was carrying these twins. And she goes and she inquires of God. She's like, what's wrong with me? And back in Genesis 25, as she asks God, the Lord tells her this. This is before these boys are born. The Lord says, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. Okay, so we have this division, the separation. One shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the other. And so here we see God laying out this reversal that's supposed to happen. It's God's plan that Jacob would become the inheritor of the promise. Now, with this promise, as Esau comes out first, Jacob comes out second. This is making him, according to the oracle of God, that Jacob would be the appointed heir. And this materializes throughout Jacob's life. When he was younger, Esau, in a moment of desperation, he sells his birthright over to Jacob in Genesis 25. And then later on in life, as Isaac is he's getting old and he's getting ready to pass on the blessing to the next one, well, Isaac, unintentionally, but by God's divine intervention, blesses Jacob instead of Esau in Genesis 27, therefore solidifying Jacob as the one who would inherit the promise, the blessing. Now, when this happens, as you might imagine, Esau is not happy about this. He's known to have a bit of a fuse. And so Jacob receives the promise. Red Esau, all he does, he sees red. And he wants to kill Jacob. So this leads to Jacob, under his mom's guidance. She says, hey, you need to get out of here. Put some space between you and Esau. Go back to the land of Abraham, where he came from. That's the land of Haran. Go put some space between you and your brother. Maybe he'll cool down in a little while. But while you're there, go find yourself a nice girl. And so Jacob, he leaves, and he goes to the land of Haran, and he meets his uncle Laban, which at first it's great. Laban receives him warmly, and start to make some wedding arrangements. And then before you know it, Jacob is being tricked by Laban. And although Jacob does end up getting a couple of wives and about a dozen kids out of this whole ordeal, things start to go sour with Laban, and God appears to Jacob and tells him, it is time for you. It's been 20 years since he left, fleeing from the wrath of Esau. It's been 20 years. He says to him, it's time for you to go home. Go back to the land from which I called you and return. And so this is what has been happening. Jacob has left the land of Haran. Laban came after him for a second, but God kept him away. And then now he's about to enter back into the land of Canaan, the land, the home base for Jacob, which is where we find ourselves. Now, Jacob gets close to home. As he's rounding the bend, he's curious, how's my brother Esau handling this still? Is he still really angry with me, or has he cooled down a little bit? And he's wondering, so he sends out some messengers ahead of him. These messengers go ahead, and they return to Jacob, not with a report about how Esau has been doing. They tell him, hey, your brother Esau is coming to meet you. Oh, and by the way, he's coming with 400 men, which, by the way, is the size of a militia. So you can imagine that Jacob is very concerned. In fact, Scripture tells us that he's very frightened. He's very ruffled in this moment. He doesn't know what's going to happen. This idea of Esau coming with an army is making him very, very nervous, and he starts strategizing. He says, well, okay, if Esau is going to come against me, at least I'd be able to sort of mitigate my losses here. He splits up his camp. He puts his favorite people with his kids and his wives in one camp and another camp, and so he divides them up. But then he has this idea that he's going to send gifts, because God, in his time in Haran, God has made Jacob very prosperous. He's given him lots of animals, lots of people, and specifically animals in this case. Jacob says, why don't I just bless Esau? If I take the things that I have, if I use my wealth to win friends, maybe Esau will accept me, and the whole thing will smooth over. So that's what he does. He sends drove after drove of livestock to go meet Esau, hoping to sort of win his affection over with these gifts. Now he sends out these gifts, and that night he settles down, knowing that, any day now, Esau's going to come around. He's going to crest the hill. I'm going to see him. And he settles down for a night of, probably very restless sleep, I would imagine. And it turns out to not just be a restless night of sleep, but a night of wrestling. A stranger shows up in the night. Very confused. He's like, who could this be? At first he thinks maybe it's Esau, maybe it's Laban, I don't know who it is. Maybe somebody from the hill country coming to get me. Well, it turns out that this stranger who's wrestling Jacob is none other than God, the God-man. I'd say it's the pre-incarnate Jesus. He came and wrestles with Jacob in the night. And Jacob, I think in one case, he's fighting for his life, but at the same time, he's fighting for something more. It becomes very clear he's fighting for a blessing. At one point, Jacob is winning. The God-man touches his hip, pops out a socket, and Jacob says, I will not go unless you bless me. He wants a blessing. He's fighting for that blessing. And surprising to us, if I were to show down with God and have a little wrestling match, 100 times out of 100 times, I'm going to fail. God's going to win. He's going to trounce me here. But in this case, very interestingly, Jacob prevails. And he's baffled by this. And God himself says, you've prevailed. You've striven with God, and you have prevailed. Jacob came out on top. He got the blessing. And now he's sent off. And he's sent off with two things. A new name. He's now called Israel, which we'll see in coming weeks that it'll get reinforced here once again. But he also gets sent off with a limp, because that touch to the hip socket forever changed his ability to walk. Now he has a new gait. But in the shock of this wrestling match, which is profound, this is the most insane night of his life, he says, I have seen the face of God, and yet I still live. I've come face to face with God, and I'm still here to talk about it. which is pretty astonishing. Now, this brings us, so that night of wrestling winds down. Maybe caught a couple minutes of sleep, I don't know. The next morning is when chapter 33 picks up. After that wrestling match with God, we step into Genesis 33, verse 1. And Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. He still has the whole entourage. So he divided his children among him. So Jacob, again, he's strategizing. He's dividing his children. All right, we're going to go by ranks. You've got the servants and their kids. You've got Leah and her kids. And behind them will be Rachel and her kids. That's what's going on in verse 2. Now, what's Jacob doing here? Well, strategizing, yes. He's trying to mitigate losses again. But he's also kind of showing his hand about who's his favorite here. Right? Because if an enemy's attacking from the front, then the people who are the safest are the ones in the back. They have the opportunity to scurry away. Now, this is going to be interesting here because as we look at Jacob and Esau and their sibling tension, we'll see later the next generation there's also sibling tension, and this probably had something to do with that, where Joseph is not going to be very fondly appreciated by his siblings. So, Jacob arranges his household, and then we see in verse 3, he steps up to the front. We see verse 3. He himself, that's Jacob, went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Now here we see something pretty significant. The night before, Jacob is afraid, he's terrified, he's shaking in his boots, he's sweating this whole thing. And all of a sudden, we see this newfound courageous leadership come from Jacob. Right, where he's going, okay, I'm going to organize my family, but I realize that this whole tension between me and Esau is between me and Esau. And so I need to be the one. He takes the responsibility. I need to be the one to go to the front and face this head on. And so he does. Now we got to ask ourselves, where did this courage come from? Because that wasn't there last night, not before the wrestling match. This courage came from his wrestling match with God. That night he spent sprawling with God is what prepared him for this reunion with Esau. You have to imagine, I was reading through Romans 8 earlier this morning, and you just have to imagine. So if Esau goes and he strives with God and prevails, you have to imagine, he's thinking, if I could do that, if I can wrestle with God and come out on top, well, certainly, what's Esau to God? I think I could do that. Well, and so this idea of wrestling with God and coming out, this is actually what gives him the courage. And not only that, he walked away from that, not only with a limp, but with the blessing. I know God is for me. I know God is going to do something through me. And so regardless of what happens, it might go bad, it might go good, but regardless of what happens, my faith is in God. I'm going to trust him. I'm going to step into this moment and not cower in fear. So this is a profound moment of faith that we see from Jacob. His faith allows him to see past this confrontation. And it's scary. I mean, Esau has 400 dudes behind him that if he's really angry, this thing could go sideways very, very fast. But he's convinced, God will get me through this. See, this is what faith does. This is what your faith does in God. When the moment is hard, when situations seem dark or uncertain, faith is knowing that God is with me, God is for me, and God has control over all things. See, Esau, believe it or not, he's under the domain of God. God has grips on the situation. It's not a wild card, like, oh, what's he going to do? God knows. God has control over this. Faith is knowing God is with me, God is for me, he has control over all things. This is what, we sang about it this morning. This is what Romans 8 sort of crescendos into. He says, if God is for us, who can be against us? And then he goes back up and says, and we know for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Faith sees this. Faith can see through or past the confrontation. Now, this does not mean that life will be easy. In fact, the next chapter we're going to see is not very easy here. It doesn't mean, faith does not mean easy life. What it means is that God is there for us in the midst of it. God is with us in the midst of it. God is in control over all of it. Now, Esau, he might flip, He might rage. But Jacob steps into this with faith. God will see me through. Whatever happens, God is going to work all things together for my good. Now, this reality, this faith conviction, is what instills in Jacob a profound confidence. His confidence is not necessarily in himself, not even in his strategizing. Though we do see some prudence in his ability to sort of shuffle his people and try to strategize in that way, his confidence is not in that. His confidence is in God, who had called him, who promised him as he was moving into the land of Haran that he would be with him and bless him and protect him. His confidence is in God. And this confidence in God and his promises allows for two things to happen. Number one, it allows him to face hard things. Confidence in God allows us to face hard things. Number two, it produces a confident humility. This is one of the things that is so striking about Jacob in this particular instance. I mean, he just strove with God and prevailed, and you think he might have this swagger about himself, right? Undefeated. Who else in the world's beat God in a wrestling match? Nobody. But he doesn't have it. You don't see that. Now, why is that? Why doesn't he have a swagger? Well, his limp reminds him every single time he takes a step that all it took was one touch from God to pop his hip out. So he's not braggadocious. He's not arrogant. He's not cocky. At the same time, the fear and the trepidation that he had the night before, that seems to have dissipated. I think one of the ways that this passage gets misinterpreted is when you see Jacob's confident humility before Esau as he bows and his family bows. He calls him, he doesn't call him a brother, he calls him Lord. Like he's acknowledging. It's like, hey, I respect you. Well, it's not cowering. He's showing humility, a confident humility. This is what happens when we strive with God. Striving with God makes you humble. At the same time, it gives you this kind of boldness. Jacob has that. Now, it's with this humble confidence that he approaches Esau. And we see as he bowed 7 times. He's approaching Esau. He's off in the distance. He's bowing 7 times. He's showing, okay, I respect you. Really what he's saying is like, I'm not here to fight. Jacob doesn't want to fight. But he doesn't know what Esau wants. Esau might want to fight. So he bows 3 times. Or 7 times as he approaches, as he's hoping for peace, as he's hoping that maybe bygones can be bygones. Now, Esau's the wild card here. We see a very unexpected reception take place in verse 4. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Now, there's this, if you go back in the story, there are these verbs that take place, these punchy verbs when Esau is upset. He wants to kill him, like it's very punchy. Here we see they're counterbalanced to each other. We see these verbs of softness towards him. It says they met him, embraced him, fell on his neck, kissed him, and he wept. So the fact that he ran to him, Esau ran to him. What we see here is an unexpected gift of brotherly affection. What Jacob was anticipating was World War, I don't know, I guess maybe one at this point, I don't know, but a world war between brothers, brother war, sibling war. Instead, what he found was affections of his brother. Now, as Esau approaches, he's very warm, but he does have some questions. We see these laid out in verses 5 through 7. And when Esau lifted his eyes, he saw the women and the children. He said, "Who are these with you?" And Jacob said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. And then all the women and the children, they all bow. They come forward and they bow and they meet them. This is your uncle Esau, and they're all friendly and hugs and, nice. It's nice region. But here we see Jacob giving credit to God. Who are these people? He says, well, these are the people that God gave me. I didn't. It's like, this isn't my doing. God graciously he increased me. If you remember, Jacob left home with nothing, just the clothes on his back. And Jacob is now returning with a multitude of people, lots of possessions. He's very wealthy. He goes, all of it God gave me. Well, the next question is, okay, well, hey, what do you mean by this company? He's talking about the droves of animals that Jacob sent before him as a gift, like a peace offering to Esau. He's like, what do you mean in verse 8? What do you mean by all this company that I meet? And Jacob is very forthright. He answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Now, there's a little bit of haggling that goes on here. Verse 9, Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Jacob said, no, please. If I found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I've seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So here is a gift. And it's not just a nice gift, but this is meant to be a sort of a peace offering. And this is the stipulation of this. What Jacob says, if I have found favor in your sight. So Esau, if we're cool, I want you to have all this stuff. And so there's this exchange that's happening. It's like he's trying to feel out, where's Esau at? Are we cool? Is it chill? Or are we about to, Rochambeau? And Esau, he eventually relents. He takes it. He says, I will accept this. He takes the gift. Now, it's interesting here. A couple interesting things about this conversation here. I mean, you've got 20 years of baggage, 20 years of hurt feelings. And we can argue all day about who's in the wrong and who's not and what. It doesn't matter, really. You've just got hurt feelings. 20 years. But what you don't see in this exchange is the desire to rehash the old drama. Now, there are times where we may need to talk through something. Right? If you're in conflict with somebody, we got to go back, kind of figure it out, own your wrongdoings. But in this case, and sometimes that can actually be counterproductive. And in this case, I think it would have been because they were more focused on moving forward. How do we establish peace? They want peace. So they didn't rehash those. They let love cover a multitude of sins, which is something that when we're put in a family, when we're put in a church family, it's something that we have to learn to do. I mean, there are going to be times where we must confront sin, definitely. Yes, that happens. You see this as a consistent pattern. Matthew 18. You see this, Paul does it to Peter. You see this confrontation of sin, but there are times where we just let love cover a multitude of sins. We don't need to rehash everything. We believe the gospel and we forgive as we've been forgiven. I think this is a moment where this kind of happens. Now, the second thing that's interesting is that Jacob says this. This is a profound statement because, he says this to Esau. He says, seeing his face is like seeing God's face. And he doesn't mean this in like a metaphor. He means this in a very literal sense because he just saw the face of God, right? I saw the face of God and I lived to talk about it. And he comes back to Esau and it's like seeing you is like seeing the face of God, which is interesting here. What is he saying here? What's he getting at? This is not flattery. This is a legitimate expression of gratitude. See, when Jacob met Esau, he, to some degree, I mean, you see this by his preparations, he expected judgment, but instead what he received from his brother was an embrace. He expected judgment, and instead he got kissed. Now, whatever change occurred to Esau, which, by the way, something changed in Esau over 20 years. Right? To go from plotting to kill him to now, he runs to him, embraces him, kisses him, they wept together. Something changed. Who gets the credit for that? God. God does. And we see the pattern in this because when Jacob's talking about his wealth, who does he say got the credit for all that again? Well, God made his family great. He made his wealth great. He did something in Esau's life. All the credit goes to God. God dealt graciously with me, and it appears as if God has dealt graciously with Esau, at least to the extent of this relationship being cooled down, some kind of reconciliation. Now, I don't know. We may see Esau. I don't know. I have no idea. God knows. We may see Esau in the new heavens, new earth. I'm not sure. Some people argue that we will. We don't really know. But there's something that happened in this relationship where God had an effect on Esau, where his heart was softened towards Jacob, who is the one that was called to be blessed, to inherit the promise. And we see the promise of God. When he told Abraham that he was going to bless Abraham, the purpose of blessing Abraham was to bless the nations, to bless the whole world, which is an indication, which kind of is a callback to the fact that through Abraham, the snake crusher is going to come, right? The one who is going to crush the head of the serpent. Because the blessing is going to overrule the curse of Genesis 3. So we see this promise fulfilled as God promises Abraham, I'm going to bless you and you're going to bless the world. Here we see Jacob, Abraham's offspring, blessing Esau. Esau gets part of the blessing. He gets cut in. Doing exactly what God intended to do through Jacob. Now, as gifts are exchanged, Esau receives it. The sibling squabble has been squashed. Okay, they receive the terms of the stipulations. If I found favor in your sight, accept these. Esau accepts these. It seems to be everything's okay. And actually, we see that Esau's probably in a really good spot because he actually invites Jacob back to go home with him to Seir, which is where Esau hails from. Now, Jacob politely declines. We see a couple invitations. Hey, I'll lead ahead of you. You follow behind. Jacob says, no. If we can't keep up with your fast militia, we'll come at our own pace. We got kids to worry about. We got livestock that's nursing. We just got to take our own pace. We'll meet you there. Then Esau says, well, I'll leave some of my people back behind with you to make sure that you get to our place. And Jacob says, no, that's not necessary. We'll get there. Now, this is a polite way of declining Esau's invitation. It's sort of an ancient Eastern hospitality thing that maybe we don't totally grasp. But Esau invites, Jacob politely declines. But why? Why does Jacob decline? A lot of commentators will speculate it's because he's actually really, really nervous that Esau isn't genuine. That Esau is actually scheming to get him when he's not expecting it. Which, this is fair to think, at least consider that option. But there's another option that I think is actually more persuasive. And that's the fact that when God called Jacob out of Haran from the land of Laban, he told him to come back to the land of Canaan. Come back to the land which I called you out of. In fact, in Genesis 12, Abraham spends some time in Shechem. And here we'll see Jacob making his way back to Shechem, the place where God promised to give to Abraham and his offspring. And so Jacob, I don't think it's out of fear that he declines these invitations. He's on a mission. God called me to go back home. I'm going to follow God. I'm going to go back home. And so he's on a mission to Canaan. And with that, the brothers peacefully depart. We see this in 16 and 17, where it says, so Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. Now, if I had a map, we'll do this backwards. So Haran is up north. Seir is kind of over here on the east side of the Red Sea. Is that right? I don't know. And Jacob is actually going to go to the opposite side of the Dead Sea. So he's moving actually further away from Esau, which goes back to the oracle that the two will be divided. And this is going to solidify later on. The two will be divided, and they do divide. They divide peacefully. And he comes to the place of Succoth, and he names the place Succoth because he builds a booth there. Now, Jacob? Jacob has had a great track record of naming places that he visits. Right? Bethel, house of God, right? You saw God, all that stuff. Peniel is where he saw God face to face. These great names. And he comes to Succoth, and he names it Succoth, which means booths. It's like, dude, what the heck? You getting lazy with this naming game or what? But actually, there's some pretty significant thing going on here. What he's saying is, I'm home. He builds a house, sets up these booths, these stables for his animals. He's saying, I'm home. when God met me as I was on my way out of the land of Canaan, he told me he's going to bless me and protect me and bring me back. And look where I am. I'm home. And he settles down even further in the land. He moves a little bit further to the west in the land of Shechem. We see this in verse 18. He says, and Jacob came safely, keyword, safely, to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. That's where God called him from. On his way from Paddan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. So he actually now owns some of this land. He's got a little sliver of the promised land. It's now his. He's got his house on it. He pitched his tent there. And not only that, he erects an altar and called it El Elohi Israel, which means God, the God of Israel. Jacob has historically, whenever he has these encounters, he would set up a monument. Abraham did this, same thing too. He had an encounter with God, something happens, significant moment. He would mark it with an Ebenezer, like something that pointed to God intervened. God did something. And here, Jacob lands in Shechem, and he creates this altar to the God, the mighty God, the God of Israel, which is his name, the God of Jacob. It's a monument. God brought me out of here. God brought me back safely. Now, we've done an overview of what's going on here, but let me wrap this up here. What do we make of this? What do we make of this text? What do we walk away from this text in our daily lives? Now, there's something that could be said about the story of brotherly reconciliation that we see, of Jacob and Esau. They're getting together. There's peace here, some kind of peace. Now, that's part of the story, but it's not actually the main point of the story. We can certainly see that reality, and that reality actually points us to the reality of the reconciliation that we have with God that comes to us through faith in Jesus Christ. That when we see God, he can bring peace to the most volatile of situations. There's no conflict too big that God cannot smooth out, and he does so through the blood of his Son. And he does so in the most epic way of reconciling sinners to a holy God. We see this story of reconciliation that points to this bigger story of reconciliation. That's there. That's actually not the main point. The reason why I surveyed the whole entire story of Genesis up to this point and recaptured Jacob's story is because this is the final leg of the journey sequence in Jacob's life. This is the end of a big chapter of his life. And it brings us to a place of resolution. After 20 years of being away from home, 20 years of being a nomad, of just trusting God step by step, of stepping into Laban's household, which ended up being filled with hardship and trials, of dealing with being swindled by Laban to not have one wife but two wives, and one of them he doesn't really care for, of dealing with Laban's cruelty, being chased down by Laban, having in the back of his mind this brother who's out there that any day might pop up and stab him in the back. He's got all of these things that he's working through. It's been resting on his shoulders. And finally, we come to the end of his story, and God has brought him home safely. God orchestrated every single snippet of Jacob's story. One, he wanted to grow Jacob's faith. It's easy to trust God when times are good, but can you trust God when things are dark, uncertain, hard? That's why God led him into this 20 years of hardship. Two, he wanted to see, can Jacob be patient? Can he work on my time frame and not his own? 20 years is a long time to wait to come back home. And through all of these trials and difficulties, God is actually doing a work on Jacob. He's making him Israel. And he finally delivers on this promise to bring Jacob back home, the promise that he made to protect him and to prosper him, to give him peace. And so it's easy to see this end of the chapter here. that God brought him home safely. As John Newton penned the hymn, Amazing Grace, he writes this: "'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace shall lead me home." God's grace brought Jacob through every up and down. And God's grace brought Jacob home. And the same is true for us, that we in this life are sojourners. This world is not our home. We are sojourning through it. And like Jacob, as he faced opposition, he'll face more opposition later on in the land of Canaan. As he faced opposition, we as Christians, we are aliens among the world. We don't love the things the world, the culture loves. This creates enmity, this creates strife. But we have to understand that it's God's grace that brought us out of the darkened world and put us into the kingdom of light. It's God's grace that leads us every step of the way, even into those dark nights of difficulty and pain and trial. And God's grace has brought us thus far. And God's grace will bring us home. See, this is what God intends for us, that we would live with him back in the shalom of Eden, in this perfect environment, in harmony with God and with man, with our environment, with the things that have gone broken. God intends for us to bring us back into this home base where things were as you met. Now, if you've ever, well, maybe everybody has, but you grow up, you lived at home, your mom and dad, you had your own space, in your own bedroom, and you go away to college, and you come home, and your room has totally been changed. Doesn't feel like home anymore. You know what I mean? It's like you're a little displaced. Like bringing you back to real home, like to the place that feels like home. That's what God is doing for us in the story of humanity, bringing us back to the place that we were intended for in the new heavens, new earth, which is the new and improved Eden. And so we know, because God is gracious to bring us thus far, we can trust that he will bring us home. He has promised this. He's promised to give us peace. He's promised to prosper us. Maybe not in every way that you imagine, but in many ways, and some you can't even imagine. And he will see us through to the end. Regardless of where you are in life, we need not fear. We need not be afraid. God is with us, God is for us, and God will bring us home. Amen.